within the educational system?
In higher education or K through 12?
For the population it affects, whatever admissions judgments, does it within that system add spaces?
No, it does not add spaces. It talks to the tailored use of various factors for the admissions process.
Thank you very much. On my own time, the largest growing population of students within any ethnicity in our University of California and CSU system consists of Asians and East Indians, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese are the most represented in those groups. Is it the author's contention that those groups, in fact, are overrepresented and therefore should be kept from those limited spots?
Is that another question of the author?
We'll call it a question of the author. It was mostly rhetorical.
Okay, then. Okay, next. Mr. Alejo.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in strong support of this measure. And I was saddened to hear the comments made just a little while ago. It really shows that some of us are oblivious to the long history of discrimination and barriers into our institutions of higher learning. There's been, historically, people of color have been underrepresented, and certainly after Prop 209 passed, our numbers of various students of color have plummeted, and they haven't recovered ever since. The analysis addresses what is happening for our undergraduates, but I want to speak what's happening in our graduate schools, our graduate and professional schools here in California, because it's not only the fact that there's less students of color. Our graduate schools and professional schools do not reflect the demographics of our state, of the people who live in California, but now entire professions are being adversely impacted by not having a wide representation of diversity within these professions. There's been less students of color who have gone into our law schools, our medical schools, schools of engineering, schools of business, our PhD programs, and this is an alarming concern. And you're even hearing from the business community, corporate law firms, hospitals saying we want to recruit more doctors and lawyers of color, but we're not finding them. They're not being generated out of our UC and CSU graduate and professional schools. And so this is trying to address this major crisis facing our state. We look at the population that is growing, the demographics, and then the number of people that are coming out and becoming the next generation of leaders in these respective professions. We need to address this concern. This is a measure towards addressing that and making sure that our gates to our universities remain open and that students, no matter what your background, will have an access to become leaders in those respective professions. And to address the concern of Ms. Halderman, there's also Filipino and Hmong students that are drastically underrepresented. There's a stereotype that all Asians are entering into these schools, but there's groups also that are shut out. And those are just two groups within the Asian American community that also should have greater access to attend these graduate and professional schools and our undergraduate programs as well. I ask for your support of this bill.
Mr. Dickinson.
Madam Speaker, the U.S. Supreme Court in 2003 in Grutter versus Bollinger recognized that the use of narrowly tailored issues of race and other considerations in admissions decisions to further a compelling interest in obtaining the educational benefits that flow from a diverse student body was sufficient to uphold what's requested in this legislation. I can attest from my own personal experience that the benefits of being part of a diverse student body pay dividends over and over again as the years go by, as each of us who has had the benefit of being part of diverse student bodies learns from the experience of our fellow classmates, becomes more sensitive to the issues that are important to them, becomes more educated and aware as to the backgrounds and circumstances of all those who make up California and our country. we learn to take advantage of the diversity that strengthens our state and our nation. This legislation only seeks to ensure that our colleges and universities are as strong as they possibly can be in reflecting the state of California, and therefore become the foundation for building a better and stronger and more prosperous state of California. It's important that we make sure that the entire breadth and spectrum of California is reflected in our student bodies and indeed beyond our borders internationally, because we know that when we reflect the diversity of California and the world, we are indeed building a better state and a better future. I would urge an aye vote.
Mr. Furutani.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. When I worked at UCLA, one of the things with the students as the population became more and more diverse, this was in the 1980s, one of the things that the students did to acknowledge their success and give their parents an opportunity to visit the campus and see what they had done, the students, they started having ethnic graduations, an African-American graduation, Latino graduation. This, of course, was in the context of the Department of Social Sciences and all the different graduations. Really a unique approach in that the students had a moment to speak and thank their parents and family and friends for their support, because they pretty much knew they could not have gotten there and been successful without their help. The Asian Pacific Islander community also had that graduation, which candidly at UCLA was usually relatively big. My oldest son graduated from UC Irvine. And when he graduated and we were preparing for scheduling the graduation events and the dinners and stuff to acknowledge his accomplishment, I asked him, are you going to go to your Asian American graduation at UC Irvine? And he said, Dad, they don't have a Asian graduation at UC Irvine because that would be just plain redundant. And I said, what did you mean? And he didn't explain it. He was beyond those explanations. Oh, Dad, that was usually the answer. We went to his graduation, and I saw why it was redundant. If you've been to a UC Irvine graduation, you know what I'm talking about. I usually get a pretty good laugh at this point, but that's okay. That's all right. The issue, though, relative to the bill that we have before us, deals with a very important word, one word. It's called consider, that you can consider these things relative to the issue of admissions. I don't know if you've seen the new admissions policy for the University of California. It is not being done on test scores, on SAT scores alone. I'm sure you understand that this is not a meritocracy where the richest or the strongest or one color gets to go and other colors don't. This is not a meritocracy. This is called a democracy. In a democracy, one thing about California is that we have the master plan in education, higher education. Last year, we had the 50-year anniversary, and we had a committee that looked at it. Two things were promised with the master plan for higher education in California, which made California the brightest light, not only in terms of the 50 states of the Union, but countries of the world. And that's one, that the higher education master plan in California guaranteed that anybody that wanted to go to college or the university had that right and could go. The second thing that it promised was that you could go and it would be free. Now, the second promise has already obviously been broken. If you've seen some of the tough decisions we've all had to grapple with in the last several years, the issue of anybody that wants to go, all you have to be is 18 or older, there's a place for you at community college, CSU, or the UC system. That promise is being broken right now as we speak because admissions is being limited. And as admissions is being limited and it's getting harder and harder to get into the universities are seeing that the approach for admissions cannot be done just as a meritocracy. It has to be done more holistically. So they're considering a lot of things relative to admissions to the university. This is what this bill simply does. is it takes some issues that were taken off the table, puts them back on, not as a lock guarantee that if you're of this race that you get in, that race now can be considered. Your ability for your family and what their salaries are with your parents, or if you have a single parent, can be considered. That we want to make sure that students are admitted from throughout the state of California, and where you live can be considered. All of these things can be considered. This bill merely says consideration can be a part of the determination of admissions. It is not as scary as people think. You don't have to raise all the fear factors that we like to do on this floor. Some members always bring up some crazy thing that they're going to say that's going to scare everybody. All these people of color are going to charge the walls of the university, and they're going to, by God, get in our classes. This ain't about that. It's about people having access.
Thank you, Mr. Furutani.
Being considered. I urge and I vote on this bill.
Mr. Norby.
I know the author only wants to eliminate unfair barriers to admission, and I appreciate that. I am a graduate of one of 3 California colleges with presidential alumni. The other 2 are Hoover from Stanford and Nixon from Whittier. I graduated from Occidental College, which is which has an alumni which is currently President of the United States, Barack Obama. Yeah, he didn't graduate from there. He had to transfer to Columbia to graduate, but he did attend his first 2 years at Oxy. And he is credited by some as the first black president, the first African-American president. He's also the first president born in Hawaii, the first president who speaks Indonesian. Dacia may be the second one, but he was the first. And he was also a president who was raised by a white mother. I mean, he was many things. And that is the challenge, and the problem I have with the bill is that race and ethnicity are not objective scientific anthropological realities. They're changing political constructs. They vary from country to country. They vary from time to time. And I don't know how this bill would deal with that. The concept of who is white and who is not white changes. Are Arabs, Iranians, Indo-Americans. An Egyptian is obviously an African-American, though he may be largely of Greek ancestry from Alexander the Great, or maybe of Arab ancestry. Arab Americans, where do they fit? It's not a racial category. It's more of a linguistic category based on geography and certain other things. Kids are asked to self-identify themselves based on this, and I guess I have a rhetorical question. Maybe the author can partly address it, but he doesn't have to. Would this be based on self-identification, or would the graduating high school where the kids come from identify these kids for the admission office? Because if it's based on self-identification, more and more kids are simply refusing to identify themselves. The none of the above category is growing. And most of these are Asian American kids who feel that the current system works against them, even though there theoretically isn't any race consciousness in it. In fact, the toughest thing to be to get into any UC is an Asian female, because of all the groups in high school that score the highest, they are there. And this could make it tougher for them and simply cause them to check the none of the above category or decline to state category. I say this not as an academic exercise, but if you were to look at my family, my new son, my 3 stepchildren, my son, oldest son who's currently at USC, I don't know if they're white, I don't know if they're of color, I don't know if they're minorities or majorities, but they are the new face of America. We have to deal with that, but it can't be dealt with by racial bean counting and mutual exclusive categories when the reality is much more complex, and I don't think this bill would deal with that, aside from the fact that it would overturn Prop 209, which was approved by the voters of the state. Thank you.
Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, must rise to oppose this. And I'm going through some of the same things other members have gone through. My son's in the second year of high school, and what we're talking about for his academics is what's going to make him competitive to go into that university he wants to do when he gets out. And, you know, I also grew up, like a lot of us do, through the civil rights era, where competition was not there. It was not a free playing field. And there was a lot of wrongs done over the years to people of color in this country. And a lot of things have done to try to unwind that. But here and now, I'm trying to teach my kids that color is no different. Race is no different. Where you come from is no different. Trying to teach them that. And it seems like we do more and more bills up here categorizing our youth into certain categories, where we should be teaching them that you earn your place in, when you go to education, higher education, you have to earn and compete. I like the fact that you don't have those questions on there because you're competing with your fellow students in for placements. Yes, the universities are much better off having diversity, and we should encourage the schools that prep our students to go to higher universities to be competitive at that level, because that's going to teach them throughout. But if we sit there and categorize people all the way up through education, then when they get out to the working force out there, are we going to categorize them by them as well? Or is it going to be the best person who competes for that job? Is it going to be the best person who runs for election, who gets the most votes? It's not done on other categories, but who competes the best. This is a society that we need to be competitive. And unfortunately, we have limited spots now. We're actually, we probably have a lot more spots if we didn't have foreign students from out of state and other countries come in our university system. But the economics work out for those universities to take those categories. We're going to categorize how many people we should take from the outside the state of California, because we're subsidizing those people's education as well. All these things come down to, are we going to social engineer our society? The voters of 209 said no. We want it based on competition. We want it based on scores and entrance exams, and who's going to be the best for that. And for each of the categories of the hundreds of thousands of students applied to each school, they're going to pick the best that are best suited to best succeed in that education system at that time. And we need to encourage better K-12 education so more diversity makes it up to those competitive levels. But we are putting this off till they get in the job market, where all of a sudden that these different preferences are not there, and they're going to have to compete. I urge you no vote on this measure.
Mr. V.M. Perez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I appreciate the debate. Cornel West, Dr. Cornel West, once wrote that race does matter. And as a matter of fact, the California Endowment Foundation, working with many nonprofit organizations throughout the state of California, also stated that place also matters. The truth of the matter is that race mattered because disproportionately people of color are negatively impacted socially, economically, politically, and in this case, educationally. We already know the debate, and we've heard it already last week, that too often we have students of color, specifically Latinos, as well as African-American students, ending up in the prison system, as opposed to in the university system, which is what this bill is trying to do. And as well, we also know that when we talk about people of color living in certain areas, right, certain folks and their communities don't have access to grocery stores that perhaps have nutritious produce. We have more liquor stores in the barrio and in the ghetto. That's real. Let's not forget that. And so when we talk about this, this is about equal opportunity for all folks. And since the passage of 209, is what I see here, there has been a significant drop in the percentage of enrolled minority students at both the CSU and UC, particularly in Latino and African American enrollment. Reports have shown that California high schools are graduating more underrepresented students who are UC and CSU eligible. However, they are not enrolling at the same rate. As a matter of fact, in 1995, before Proposition 209 took effect, underrepresented minority students accounted for 38% of California high school graduates and 21% of entry and UC freshmen, a difference of 17%. In 2004, they made up 45% of high school graduates, but had fallen to 18% of incoming UC freshmen, a difference of 27%. And unfortunately, without this bill, ladies and gentlemen, members, this gap will only continue to widen. And that's on that side of the spectrum, when we talk about education and making sure that we create equal opportunity for all individuals that want to go on to higher education. When we link it to the economy, we know already that the demographics are shifting in the state of California. And when we talk about how we can recover and how we can rebuild in the state of California with our economy, we talk about obviously the issues of regulation, right? We've talked about issues of taxes, right? But we've also talked about issues of infrastructure and the lack thereof. But another element of infrastructure that we tend to forget about is that human infrastructure and that social capital, that it needs to be rebuilt. This is an opportunity for all our students, no matter who they are, but in specifically youth of color, that perhaps have never been given an opportunity in the past, or their parents have never given an opportunity in the past. This will give them that opportunity. This is a Latino Caucus priority bill, and I also request an aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Lara, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank Senator Dickinson for reminding us that the U.S. Supreme Court did allow the use of race, ethnicity, economic background in very tailored and specific situations. The bill complies with that ruling and therefore does not violate 209. We have legal arguments, legal writings saying this time and time again. Harvard, Cornell, Princeton, Stanford all use a holistic approach to their student body. It's time for the UC to be allowed to do the same and to ensure that we look at a student's entire record when we are looking at an admissions process, to ensure that we get the most diverse, the most prepared student that has lived and has shared an experience that might not be very similar to ours, but has every opportunity to succeed in our public university system. That's all this bill does. This bill ensures that our universities in California, our private universities, have an opportunity to provide a holistic approach when enrolling our best and brightest students in the state. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 43, noes 22. The measure passes. File items 160 through 163 pass and retain. File item 164, SB 335, clerk will read.
Senate Bill 335 by Senator Hernandez and others, an act relating to Medi-Cal, making an appropriation therefore and declaring an urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Mr. Monning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm pleased to be carrying SB 335 for Senators Hernandez and Steinberg. This is the second extension of a Medi-Cal hospital provider fee, first authored by Commissioner Jones when he was Assemblymember Jones, and then extended by Senator Steinberg. SB 335 is the culmination of many months of negotiations within the hospital community and with the administration, and is a consensus piece of legislation with all stakeholders in support. This bill will provide significant financial benefit to our Medi-Cal program and to our safety net hospitals, and will stabilize hospital reimbursement rates for the next 30 months with no cost to the general fund. SB 335 raises almost $7 billion in fees from private hospitals to be matched with over $6 billion in federal funds for a net benefit of $5.2 billion to the hospital industry. This allocation meets the first condition established by SB 90 by Senator Steinberg earlier this year and will allow hospitals to qualify for an extension under very limited circumstances to current seismic safety requirements. The second condition is triggered when we actually receive federal approval. Finally, SB 335 establishes a new pool of funds for supplemental payments to private hospitals for emergency services provided to childless adults who will be covered under the new waiver low-income health program. There's no opposition on file. This is the product of extensive negotiation and will be a win-win for our hospital community and consequently to patients in the state of California. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Norby.
I ask for an aye vote also on SB 335, Mr. Speaker. We listen to businesses when they oppose taxes and fees, but we should also listen to them when they support fees, especially fees which are narrowly constructed and which confer a specific benefit. This was the rationale why I voted for SB 549 about 20 minutes ago, a fee that the egg industry itself requested. And this is why I support SB 335, because this is a fee that the hospital industry itself is requesting an extension of because of the specific benefits they'll be receiving.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 56, noes 1. The measure passes. Ayes 56, noes 1 on the urgency. Ayes 56, noes 1 on the measure. The measure passes. File items 165 through 169 pass and retain. File item 170 pass temporarily. File items 171 through 180 pass and retain. File item 181, SB 583, clerk will read.
Senate Bill 583 by Senator Vargas and others, an act relating to taxation.
Mr. Garrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I appreciate the opportunity to present SB 583. This bill would establish the ALS Lou Gehrig's Disease Research Fund on the state of California's income tax form. ALS is a neurological degenerative disease and is always fatal. The early symptoms of the disease may include a stumbling of one's steps or difficult speaking. On average, 2.5 years after those initial symptoms strike, the patient actually dies. During those 2.5 years of battling this disease, ALS patients slowly lose their ability to use all voluntary muscles. The patient becomes unable to swallow, to speak, blink, twitch a finger, or even wiggle a toe. The patients are completely immobilized and locked in their bodies. Their minds, however, are unaffected. It has been nearly 150 years since ALS was identified, and relatively no advancements have been made. Remarkably, there is still no cause known, no cure, no prevention, and no long-lasting treatment. The need for research, obviously, is staggering. SB 583 would establish the ALS Lou Gehrig's Disease Research Fund on the state income tax forms and thereby allow taxpayers to designate on their tax returns that a specific amount in excess of their already existing tax liability would be transferred to the ALS Research Fund. The donation funds would help ALS patients, giving them a lot of hope and hoping to generate much research dollars to help find a cure. I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Chesbrough.
I rise in support of this bill. Some of you may have known or remember a longtime legislative employee named Tim Davis, who left us a couple of years ago, who died from ALS. And he later went on, between the time he worked for the legislature and his illness, he was a longtime lobbyist for the telecommunications industry. Wonderful person, but those of us who are close to him watched the long, painful struggle that he had to go through. And the most tragic and difficult thing about this disease is that the last thing to go, in fact, most cases it never goes, is the mind. So cognitively, a person's completely there, but they lose all other physical capacities. In fact, just this week, there's been news that there has been some progress in terms of research, but it's just the beginnings of what needs to be discovered for us to get a handle on how to help defeat and destroy this disease. And so this is a very important measure to help move that along. And I just rise on behalf of my good friend who's no longer with us, Tim Davis, to ask your aye vote.
Ms. Yamada.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I just wish to rise quickly as well in support of SB 583. Having just lost my sister-in-law in May of this year to ALS and having two other family and friends involved in current ALS struggles and challenges, it is a frightening disease, a particularly cruel disease, and I appreciate Mr. Garrick bringing this forward on behalf of Senator Vargas. Ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Garrick.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleagues for their comments and encourage again every member on the floor here to join me in voting aye.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 65, no 0, measure passes. Okay, members, I have 3 more bills on the file. If there are other members, I have Mr. Leno, Mr. Gatto's bill. We're going back to file item 47, which is Mr. Huffman's bill, and then file item 152, which is Ms. Hayashi's bill. And if there's any other members that have bills they wish to take up, please come up to the dais. File item 182 through 187, pass and retain. File item 188, SB 819. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 819 by Senator Leno and act relating to firearms.
Mr. Gatto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, Senate Bill 819 was proposed by our Attorney General. I agreed to floor manage it because, as many of you know, I am very respectful of the Second Amendment. And I think that this bill strengthens lawful gun ownership in our state. Many gun owners, we often say, we don't need any new gun laws. What we need is enforcement. Well, here's your chance to vote on an enforcement bill. This bill preserves gun ownership for law-abiding citizens while cracking down on those who we all agree should not own guns. This public safety bill simply allows the California Department of Justice to request in the normal budget process to be able to use the DROS fees to prevent prohibited persons, those with felony convictions or mental health issues, from owning firearms. This doesn't raise the fee. In fact, last year our Attorney General proposed lowering this fee. It just makes explicit that the Attorney General can apply during the normal budget process to use this fee to do what all of us want to do, and that is to keep guns out of the hands of those criminals who give other gun owners a bad name. This program works. Last year, the DOJ seized 1,200 firearms from those who by law could not own them. We should strengthen this program. This is a good bill. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Donnelly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. You know, the firearms industry is one of those that's booming across this country. Ammo sales the last couple of years are up massively. But with law after law after law after law on those who are in the firearms industry, we're driving them out of the state. It just doesn't make any sense. If there are excess fees in the DROs, then we ought to refund those to that industry and to those ratepayers. We shouldn't be just taking these fees and diverting them so that we can create an enforcement program. We have plenty of opportunity to enforce our laws. There were many in this body who voted last week to let people out of prison who had committed murders at a young age. And I think there's all kinds of opportunities to enforce the law and to stand up for the enforcement of the law. But I never see that from the other side of the aisle. But I see bill after bill after bill attacking our Second Amendment right. Yes, this is an attack on our Second Amendment right. It is an indirect attack. It is a backdoor attack. But it is an attack nonetheless. And I urge my colleagues to vote no on this.
Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I rise in support of SB 819 by Senator Leno. This legislation would enhance the state's ability to ensure that individuals who cannot legally possess firearms do not have them in their possession. Members, SB 819 makes sure that individuals who have been deemed mentally ill or were convicted felons do not possess firearms in order to protect our communities and guarantee public safety. In 2008, a tragic event took place in Baldwin Park, which is in my district. A man named Roy Perez shot and killed 3 people with a firearm he should not have had in the first place. Perez shot and killed his own mother and then his neighbor and 4-year-old daughter. Members, the event should not have happened.
Mr. Donnelly?
Yes, member didn't ask permission to read.
Is there any objection to allowing Mr. Hernandez to read his own notes? Okay. Seeing none, Mr. Hernandez, you may continue.
Members, the event should not have happened in my district. The assault took place under the hand and the weapon in the hand of a man that should not have had the weapon in the first place. Members, we can strengthen public safety by passing SB 819. I respectfully ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Gatto, you may close.
Thank you, colleagues. I appreciate the robust debate. I appreciate the comments by both the gentlemen who spoke. Just want to be very clear that the point of the DROS fund was for the funds are supposed to be used for all firearms-related regulatory and enforcement activities related to the sale, purchase, loan, or transfer of firearms. So this is a lawful use of these funds. We're making that explicit. I also want to address just one of the comments that one of my colleague from Twin Peaks just said. He said, gee, why don't we just give these funds back? I mean, that's kind of like saying the police have a surplus this year, so let's take all that money back. It's very important that we use these funds for their purpose, which is to prevent those people who are not authorized from owning firearms, to prevent them from owning them, to prevent them from committing crimes. I think that strengthens our gun laws. It makes life easier for the law-abiding citizens in the state, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 47, noes 23. Measure passes. File items 189 through 193 pass and retain. We're going to go back to file item 47, AB 361. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 361 by Assemblymember Huffman and others, an act relating to benefit corporations.
Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This is a bill that creates a new voluntary class of corporations for companies that want to embrace a broad duty of corporate social responsibility and to have that embedded legally into their mission. There are no costs to the state. This is a bill that puts California on the vanguard of rolling out the welcome mat to this growing new class of businesses and their investors and the jobs that they can create in our state. It is modeled after legislation that's already passed in 4 other states and is pending now in several other states. In the Senate, there were some technical amendments added regarding shareholder voting procedures and also the requirement of a conspicuous disclosure statement in the Articles of Incorporation. I want to thank my colleagues who voted this out of the Assembly a few months ago with strong bipartisan support. I'm pleased to say it enjoyed bipartisan support in the Senate as well. This is strongly supported by the California business community and, again, many, many entrepreneurs and investors who want to see this class of business really take root and prosper here in California. I respectfully request an aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 50, noes 14. Senate amendments are concurred in. We're going to go to file item 53, AB 1117. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1117 by Assemblymember Smythe and others, an act relating to animal abuse.
Mr. Smythe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. AB 1117 is back on concurrence. Amendments taken in the Senate were technical in nature. They formatted the bill to align with current law and will prevent chaptering out issues. It did receive unanimous support coming out of the Senate, and I ask for concurrence in Senate amendments today. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 64, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in. And file item 152. SB 943. On the amendments, clerk will read.
Senate Bill 943 with amendments by Assemblymember Hayashi.
Ms. Hayashi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Presenting amendments for SB 943, the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee's bill. The amendments make a technical clarification to resolve chaptering out issues, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote on these amendments and that the bill be sent out to print and back on file.
Seeing no further questions or debate, and without objection, we can take a voice vote on these amendments. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted, out to print and back on file. Mr. Calderon moves pursuant to Assembly Rule 77.2. He is re-referring the following bills to committee. These were not done earlier. At the request of Mr. Calderon, I am doing this. Pursuant to Assembly Rule 77.2, re-referring the following bills to committee. File item number 3, SB 226, by submitting to the Appropriations Committee, and file item 77, SB 310 Hancock, to the Rules Committee. Okay, we have 2 items on call. We'll take up the first item, file item 46. Oh, Mr. Calderon?
I request unanimous consent to suspend Joint Rule 62, file notice requirements to allow the following committees to meet: Local Government Committee to hear AB 1143 and SB 644 on Wednesday, August 31st, upon the call of the chair, in a room to be announced; and Water Parks and Wildlife Committee to hear AB 964 by Mr. Huffman on Tuesday, April 30, upon call of the chair, in a room to be announced.
Without objection.
Also, I ask that file items number 73, SB 270 be placed. File item 73, SB 276 be placed in the inactive file.
Clerk will note.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 2 items on call. We'll take the first one, file item 46, AB 207. Clerk will post. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 46, noes 28. Senate amendments are concurred in. File item 65, AJR 1. Clerk will post. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. What's your pleasure, Mr. Donnelly? I can't see you, Mr. Smythe. Thank you. Mr. Donnelly moves the call. Okay, members, just a reminder, you need to find a floor manager for your bills on the Senate floor. Additionally, if you are a floor manager for a Senate bill and your name is not listed in the daily file, please let the desk staff know that you are managing the bill for a senator. Okay, we have one adjourn in memory today. Ms. Bonilla.
Thank you so much for your indulgence for this adjournment. My father, David Woodward, who is 93 years old, went home to heaven on August 23rd at Atherton Baptist Homes in Alhambra, California, from complications following surgery for a broken shoulder. Born to missionary parents in the Philippines, David spent his life in ministry as a pastor and a missionary. He is survived by my mom, his devoted wife of 66 years, Elizabeth, 4 children, Mary and Ted, Edie, and myself, 11 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. David returned from the Philippines in 1935, graduated from Davidson College with a BA, went on to Princeton Seminary, where he got a master's in theology, and was ordained into the Presbyterian Church in 1942. He also received an MA from Seattle Pacific University in 1968 and a doctorate in ministry from Fuller Theological Seminary in 1979. In March of 1945, David and Betty embarked on a lifetime of work around the world, from India, China, Tibet, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan. David was multicultural long before the word was coined. He loved the Filipinos he grew up with. He also became fluent in Tibetan and Mandarin Chinese as he immersed himself in appreciating their cultures. In 1983, after living overseas for 37 years, David returned to Pasadena to become the first pastor of community outreach at Lake Avenue Congregational Church. He established a community center, a halfway house, and a family shelter, along with many other initiatives to directly help those in need within the community. David's life was motivated by his belief that God loves and accepts every person. His personal experience of God's love gave him the freedom to live a life beyond himself and in service to others, sharing love and acceptance with everyone that he came in contact with. His radiant smile and the twinkle in his eye spoke warmth and acceptance and an encouraging interest in all those around him. When he was rushed to the emergency room 3 weeks ago with a broken shoulder, the doctor explained that he would be taken in for surgery and then asked, "Mr. Woodward, do you have any questions?" My dad responded, "Yes. I was wondering if you've ever thought of writing a book. You must have so many interesting stories. I'd love to talk to you about all the things that you have seen." My dad loved writing. He published several books, most recently an autobiography of his years in Tibet called Have a Cup of Tibetan Tea. He enjoyed teaching, writing projects, and most of all, encouraging others. He was a cheerful and active member for 9 years of the Atherton Baptist Homes community. In reflection on his life, my dad said, "Through all my days has run a golden thread of God's unfailing faithfulness." Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for your condolences and your kindness to me. I loved my dad so much, and I stand here today knowing he was proud of me, and I'm so happy to be here amongst all of you who have that same dedication to service, acceptance, and that you love the people in this state. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Bonilla, please bring the name to the desk to be printed in the journal. Okay, members, we got a couple more bills, late-breaking bills, that we need to take up. Okay, the session schedule is as follows. In the meantime, Tuesday, August 30th, 9:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Wednesday, August 31st, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Okay, file item 78, SB 182. Clerk will read.
Senate Bill 182 by Senator Corbett and others, next relating to judicial appointments.
Mr. Amiano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 182 adds sexual orientation and gender identity and expression to demographic information already collected by the Governor, State Bar, and Administrative Office of the Courts. Currently, the Governor, the State Bar, and Administrative Office of the Courts collect demographic information from judicial applicants, appointees, nominees, candidates, justices, and judges. This demographic information includes race, gender, and ethnicity. This data is self-reported by the applicant. This bill does not predicate the appointment of judges based on a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. This bill does not establish or require a quota. The bill is supported by the California Judges Association, Equality California, California National Organization of Women, and several other civil rights organizations. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 49, noes 23. Measure passes. Okay, so we're going to lift the calls. File item 65, AJR 1, clerk will post. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 29, no 0. Measure fails. Mr. Donnelly, for what purpose do you rise?
Yes, I'd like to request unanimous consent to rescind the action and expunge the vote on AJR 1 and return it to the third reading file.
Okay. Mr. Donnelly, by unanimous consent, will you withdraw your motion with the consent of a second so the bill can be placed on call by unanimous consent?
Okay, if the bill is placed on call, will it be brought up on the following day?
It's going to be brought up today because that's the last item on the agenda.
Okay, and then what happens?
Okay, so the Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee will meet tomorrow, Tuesday, August 30th, upon call of the chair. Oh, 9 a.m. in room 437. Water, Parks, and Wildlife will meet tomorrow at 9 a.m. in room 437. Mr. Silva? Do you have an announcement? Mr. Silva.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is with great pride that I'm able to announce that Huntington Beach Little League is Little League World Champions. Yesterday, in front of a crowd of nearly 12,000 people, plus a television audience of close to 1 million, the Huntington Beach team representing the United States in the Little League World Series won over the team representing Japan 2-1. Two of the outs and bases loaded at the bottom of the sixth and final inning, Nick Patro, the coach's son, hit a single and stepped into Little League world history. Our pitcher, Braden Saltzman, held the other team to 1 run, 3 hits with 9 strikeouts and no walks. We'd like to congratulate the Ocean View Little League team from Huntington Beach, and I think California was very well represented. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Mansour.
Very much. I just wanted to recognize all the kids in the Little League for their tremendous victory. This is a day that everyone in the city of Huntington Beach can be celebrating, and all of Orange County as well. So congratulations are in order to all the kids, the coaches, the parents, the families, all who were supportive in making this happen. Congratulations are in order to all. Thank you.
Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'm going to move a call on file item. On file item 65, move a call. And then in a few minutes, I'm going to move to lift the call after the authors had a few minutes to work the bill.
By unanimous consent, the bill is placed on call. And Mr. Donnelly's motion is withdrawn. So the bill is on call. Mr. Nielsen, you are recognized.
Parliamentary inquiry, Madam Speaker. What is the status of the vote on the Donnelly bill right now? What is the status?
The status of the bill is on call. So we are waiting to lift the call.
Okay. And the ruling of the chair was that it was on call.
By unanimous consent, the bill was put back on call per the author's request.
Okay. And at this point, could I make a motion to overrule the chair? Would that be in order?
I just responded to your question.
Pardon?
I responded to your question. I did not make the ruling. You just asked me what happened
Okay.
and where the bill is, and so I just responded. So that is not my ruling.
All right, then I will make a motion to overrule the ruling of the chair that it is on call.
So the author requested that the bill be placed on call. And at the author's request, the bill is back on call.
But my understanding is that then that cannot be reconsidered. It can either be up or down at this point. Is that correct?
That is correct.
It was illegal for them to shut the vote down.
Yeah.
So we are now on call.
My point is that on call means there still can be a calling of the roll. Is that not correct?
Yes, we are going to lift the call in a minute, as soon as we're done with this. Mr. Calderon.
And I move to lift the call on file item 65.
Is there any objection to lifting the call? Okay. Ms. Halderman, Dr. Halderman objects. Mr. Calderon moves. Mr. Gatto seconds. That the call be lifted. It's not debatable. It's majority of those present and voting. Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Calderon requests an aye vote on whether to lift the call on file item 65, AJR 1. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 42, noes 25. Motion carries. By virtue of the motion, the call is lifted. Clerk will post. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 29, noes 0. Measure fails. Mr. Calderon moves to adjourn. Is there a second? Mr. Hall seconds that this House stands adjourned until Tuesday, August 30th at 9:30 a.m. Quorum call is lifted.